Good afternoon, everybody. Lovely to see you all here. I was thinking as I prepared this talk, I was reminded of back in 2018, me and my wife were hiking in the Sierra Mountains. We were going down a mountain pass at the time, and there's this guy coming up, working hard, sweating, looking a bit grumpy, older guy. And as he got near us, he went, "You guys, is that son of a gun Trump still in the White House?" And we said, "Yeah, he is." And he went, "Well, I guess I'll stay out here a bit longer then." I thought, even in the wilderness, in the middle of nowhere, away from civilization, people wanted to talk to me about Donald Trump. And he's, of course, that was 7 years ago, and still people want to talk about Donald Trump. So I hope you'll forgive us for the most clickbait of titles. We've called this, "So What About Trump?" But I'm afraid I'm not going to preach this wearing a MAGA hat. I'm not going to talk of tariffs, Phil's already done that. I'm not going to mention Elon Musk or the Swedish Democrats. I'll try very hard not to do too many Trump impressions. If that makes you feel shortchanged, go and see Alan. Alan does a great Trump impression. It's a really, really good, one of the very best, one of the absolute best you'll see. So go and see Alan for a Trump impression. But of course this passage is not really about politics. It definitely wasn't written with Donald Trump specifically in mind. And whilst there's always a temptation to use a passage for a springboard, I don't think Paul wrote this so that a preacher could stand in the pulpit and share their political views, explain why they're right and everyone is wrong. So you can relax, Phil. I've been joking about turning this into a 30-minute speech for political reasons. I don't think the Holy Spirit wants us to take that from the passage either. So this passage is about civil order, about authority. I think it applies to all leaders, not just the ones we like or don't like. So let's just read Romans 13, 1-7, and then let's see what the Lord would have us know today. Paul writes, "Everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and he will commend you. For he is God's servant to do you good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword for nothing. He is God's servant, an agent of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also because of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give everyone what you owe him. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honour, then honour." So before we dive into this passage, it's worth maybe thinking a little bit, why does this pop up in this part of Romans? I'm not going to do a full summary of the previous 12 chapters, but it doesn't seem necessarily sort of like the next logical thing to talk about. It sticks out a little bit from the thread that's been built by Paul so far. I think that there are some things in Romans chapter 12 that give us a bit of a clue. Paul writes, "Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And I wonder if as Paul wrote that, he thought, wait a minute, have I given people the wrong idea? Have I given Christians this idea that actually you can kind of do what you want? You need to be separate, you need to live different lives, and so the rules don't really apply to you. Of course, Jesus spoke about things like that, didn't he? He was asked, people tried to trip him up about paying taxes. Of course, this was in an environment where People were occupied by a foreign force, and yet Jesus still said, "Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's." So I think this does actually fit quite well, really. Paul is giving a lot of doctrine in Romans, but also a lot of practical advice. I want to see three things today. Firstly, why should we submit to authorities? Secondly, what about evil rulers? What about the bad guys? And then thirdly, how can we practically apply this? So firstly, why should we submit to authorities? There we go, it's working. So the first thing, authorities are established by God. It says in verse 1, everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. And then he re-emphasizes that the authorities that exist have been established by God. He's very emphatic. Paul leaves no doubt, no exceptions, that all the authorities, all the leaders, all the rulers are established by God. And perhaps this is easy to stomach when it's the ones we like. When we think of a great leader, when we think of our favourites, these aren't my favourites, these are just generic favourites. But if we think maybe of Churchill, maybe we think of Obama, maybe we think of Zelensky, maybe we think of biblical greats like King David, and it's easy to agree, they're ordained by God. They're established by God. But what about the ones we don't like so much? Maybe it's the same ones that I just listed. Hopefully not King David. But what about Putin? What about King Jong-un? What about Nebuchadnezzar? What about Pilate? Can we really say these are God's established authorities? Listen what Jeremiah writes about Nebuchadnezzar. "Now I have given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant." King Nebuchadnezzar oppressed the peoples of Israel. Did great harm. Yet he was described as the Lord's servant. When Jesus is talking to Pilate, he says, "Do you not know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you?" Pilate says that to Jesus. Jesus answers him, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given you from above." Even Pilate, the ruler who helped put Jesus to death, was seen as established by God. So there are no exceptions to this. The Bible doesn't allow us to say, this leader, he said this thing that we don't like, or he's persecuted people, so he's not established by God. It's unequivocal. Remember, Paul wasn't exactly writing in this kind of golden age of great and fair leaders. He was writing to people who they couldn't vote, they couldn't kick out their leaders every 4 years, they were under a lot of oppression, a lot of persecution, and yet he said everyone must submit himself. So for that reason alone, we should be willing to submit to authorities. It's important, just as an aside, this doesn't say we're to agree and like everything authorities do. We submit to them for the Lord's sake, not for man's sake. Peter echoes this sentiment. He says, "Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution." So you might hate your government. You might disagree with a lot of what they say. You might be a big fan of Ulf Kristersson. You might really dislike him. Do you know I had to Google the name of the Swedish Prime Minister? Isn't that embarrassing? But there you go, that's the Swedish Prime Minister. I knew it was all something. But you need to follow the Swedish rules. All of them. Even the silly ones, of which there are many. So that's the first thing. Everyone must submit to the authorities. Second thing, they exist for our good. Look at verse 3. "For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and he will commend you." Sometimes it can be dangerous, especially as Christians, because we see there is a higher power. And we can almost sort of yearn for this like idyllic, free society where nobody really tells us what to do. We all live maybe like hippies or whatever, just kind of really free, and there's no authorities, there's no institutions. And this at first can sound really idyllic and lovely, and everyone does what they want. We sort of have a model for that, really. If you go to Somalia, they basically have no government. They pretty much do what they want. And what a lot of people want to do is fairly horrendous things. And generally the more powerful people are the ones who do that. And I'm sure there are plenty of people who want to live in peace, but they're in complete terror to those who dominate. It is for our own good to have those in authority. Lawless society, anarchic society, has never really worked. Authorities exist for our own good. And again, we have to apply that across everything. We can't pick and choose. I really struggle with this. I don't like following rules. I really don't. Yesterday I was on my way to Park Run, Phil's 50th celebratory Park Run. This was Phil's last time leading as a man in his 40s. So I have 4 months to make as many jokes about that as I can before I also turn 50. But on the way to Harger Park Run, there are a load of police stopping people coming out of my little village, breathalyzing us. 9 o'clock in the morning, I don't know what's going on in my part of the world, but pulling us over, checking our driver's licence, breathalyzing us. I thought, this is the pain. I want to get there. I don't want to sit. I haven't had wine for breakfast today. But ultimately, I don't really want to live in a society where I get breathalyzed in the morning. But I definitely don't want to live in a society where you can drink and drive with impunity. We were in Italy last week, and the driving is terrifying. Sorry, David and Julia. The driving is terrifying. And I'm not saying Italians are all drunk, but the driving is so different to Sweden. And I thought, imagine, actually, if there were no rules, if everyone did what they wanted, and actually we all had a glass of wine for breakfast and went and drove. Again, not saying Italians drink wine for breakfast and then drive. Bad analogy. But anyway, imagine if it was like that. We're having a bit of fun with our Swedish citizenship application. We got another letter this week saying we need a whole load of stuff we've already asked for, plus a bunch of random stuff we've no idea why they want to know. It seems a real pain. But again, imagine a country where there was no control of borders, where there was no process, there was nothing to stop anyone becoming a citizen, whether a criminal, where they weren't checking. It's ultimately for our good. Parts of the world that don't have authority are very, very unpleasant places to live. So that's the second reason we should submit. Thirdly, this seems really blunt, but if you don't submit, you will be punished. There are laws for a reason, and even if you don't agree with the law, as Christians we're not exempt. I find that out every time I fail to park in a correct place and get a parking ticket. Just because my Bible's on the back seat, they don't say, oh, you're all right. If you don't submit to the authorities, you will be punished. Being a Christian doesn't exempt us. It says in verse 4, if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword for nothing. He is God's servant, an agent of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoing. Now we will cover in the second part when it's kind of not just, but most things that we sort of don't like or we bolt against, they're not evil rules, they're just kind of annoying. We are to submit. Fourthly and finally, and it's linked to the previous one, it's in line with our Christian conscience. Verse 5 says, therefore it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also because of conscience. again, as a Christian, and as someone who doesn't really like being told what to do, I have this sometimes kind of like, yeah, I'm a bit of a rebel, a bit of a freedom fighter, and silly rules, I can kind of ignore them. I haven't enjoyed preparing this because the Bible sort of says that's wrong. I've been running a 4-year protest against Swedish Rail, which I've now realised I need to stop. Because I once got this huge fine for going to Uppsala. So every now and again I don't pay for a Swedish ticket to try and balance it out. I've realised very clearly that's not right. That's rebelling against authority. It's a sort of victimless crime. I only do it when I do one stop on our little local light rail, and as soon as I reached the point of my fine I was going to stop, I've realised I need to stop a lot sooner than that. I need to stop now. My conscience is pricked. We're to follow the rules. It's an act of submission, not to Swedish Rail. It's an act of submission to the Lord. Our conscience should prick us if we do not submit to the authorities. So there are 4 good reasons why we should submit, why we should follow the authorities in the place we live. It all sounds very neat and tidy though, doesn't it? It's nice and easy. When I'm kind of joking a bit about parking tickets and about train tickets and drink driving, but those probably are the points of tension for us. But what about evil rulers? See, in most countries, and for most of history, it has been relatively simple. I think in 2025 in Sweden, it's not too arduous to submit to authorities. It might not always be like that here in Sweden. Many of us will live in different countries in our lives. And it may not be quite so palatable. So is there a time when you shouldn't submit to authorities? I think maybe there's 2 main categories of things. Let's just consider for a minute the Hebrew midwives back in the time of the pharaohs. So Pharaoh was very worried about the Israelites, the increasing number, worried that you had basically these foreign people living in their land. So he issued we think Europe's immigration policies is questionable. His was kill all firstborn babies. So Moses should have been killed. But it says that the Hebrew midwives were taking newborn babies and trying to hide them, trying to save them, trying to keep them from this rule. Think also Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. They were told to worship the Babylonian king. They refused. They were punished for it. Now, in both of those cases, it seems fairly clear that to submit to those authorities meant sinning. You couldn't submit to the authorities and not sin. To submit to the authorities that said, kill all newborn babies, you had to do a pretty dastardly thing. To submit to the authority that said, worship the king, you had to have a God other than the Lord. So I think that's the first category where we shouldn't submit to rulers. Go backwards. So if it causes us to sin, then we're exempt. There's biblical precedent. If there is a law that causes us to sin, well, the only way we can submit is to rebel against God. God is the ultimate authority. Then I think maybe the second case is less simple, but much more broad. There have been times in history when people have disobeyed civil authorities, when they could have kind of remained neutral. They could have stayed out. Things like meeting together, perhaps. Countries where you're not allowed to meet together. You're not sinning per se if you kind of stay online. or if you just watch some YouTube sermons from other countries. But are you following God's commands? What about protests? What about slavery back in the day when Christians were at the forefront of doing things that at the time were illegal in order that it would be changed? How can we decide what is a just rebellion? Now, I honestly didn't know where to start with this. I think it's quite a complex thing, but I found some useful guidelines, principles. John Piper, who's coming to Gothenburg in September, said there are four things we should consider. I think there's a lot of sense in these. So this is not the gospel. This is a wise person's interpretation. Four things he said. How grievous is the action? If there's a law that we're rebelling against, how grievous is it? Is it just some minor law that we're rebelling against, or is it something that sanctions violence, sanctions killing? That's the first thing. What is the extent of this unjust law? Does it just affect you? Could you just kind of grin and bear it? Or does it affect millions? Does it have an incidental inconsistency? Does it put a whole group of people at threat or at risk just because of who they are? That was the second thing. The third thing, is there a potential that if you do engage in civil disobedience, can that be a clear and effective witness to the truth? I use the example of slavery. Those who stood against slavery all those years ago, it was a clear and effective witness to the truth. They stood that they put other people above the law. And the fourth thing Piper outlined is there a movement of the Spirit where other people are feeling convicted in that direction? Because there seem to be these moments in history, and often it's amazing how many of these big changes in history, Christians are at the forefront of this. A kind of evil has existed for years and everyone's gone along with it. And then suddenly people stand up. A generation says, this is not right. So I think we have to review these things on a case-by-case basis. We have to submit to the authorities. And I think the exceptions are only if that causes us to sin, or if there's a righteous reason for it. Too often I see Christians kind of jumping a little bit on causes that I don't think fit any, if all of these. It can be a very small thing that you happen to believe in, and that's fine to believe in, but it doesn't give us the right to disobey the authorities. Jesus talks a lot about how we should conduct ourselves in these circumstances. If we look at Matthew chapter 5, he basically says two things. Do not resist and love our enemies. So even if we are in a situation where we feel it's right to stand up, to disobey the authorities, we're still to love our enemies. We're still not to resist. And if we do take the stand, we're to remember we are saved people. We are forgiven sinners. We should be doing this out of love for others, not pride, not arrogance, not for ourselves. So what should we do? What should we do practically speaking, just to wrap up? I think there's three things we can do. I think the first thing is hopefully obvious. Submit to authorities. Put this into practice. Prayerfully consider, are there areas where you're not doing this? It can be really little things. It can be really big things. Are you submitting to authorities? I think the second thing is to pray for our leaders. Pray for our leaders. The Bible says very clearly, pray for those in power. They are put there by God. And again, don't just pray for the ones you like. Pray for the ones you don't like. I was very struck by, do you remember Andy Ball came and spoke here about Ukraine? Andy's a missionary in Ukraine. He's got a Ukrainian wife, and Andy was very impacted by the Russian invasion. He shared some points for prayer a few weeks ago. One of those points was pray for all leaders involved. Pray for Zelensky, pray for Putin, pray for Trump, pray for European leaders, pray that the arrogant will be humbled and that the leaders will be wise. Pray for our leaders. It's such a difficult position. I'm not saying they're all doing a great job, but it's a difficult position to be in. Having to balance so many things. Pray for your leaders for wisdom. Pray that they'll come to know Christ. At the moment, it feels like it's a bit of we get a bit excited if a world leader even mentions God or mentions Jesus. Imagine if regularly world leaders were talking about the gospel. Imagine if world leaders were regularly talking about submitting to Christ. Imagine if the minority were the ones who didn't know Jesus as Lord. Let's pray for that situation to come about. And third and final thing, it's a very long one. If you get involved in politics, do it positively and in line with Christian values. Now, I had to Google the Swedish Prime Minister. And I'll be honest, one of the things I love about living in Sweden is I feel completely disconnected from Swedish politics because all the stories are in Swedish and I don't speak Swedish. So I know the technicalities. I could talk about the coalitions, and we actually landed in Sweden the day of the election in 2018. So my work lunchtime conversations for the next 4 months were about Swedish politics. So I got this crash course. But I don't really care. I probably care more about, I don't know, I won't finish that sentence. I don't really know. And there's nothing wrong with not really getting involved in politics. There's nothing wrong in not having opinions on things. There's also nothing wrong with having opinions on things, but do make it positive and in line with Christian values. At the moment, there's a big problem in the world where people who disagree can't talk about that civilly with one another. I think social media has probably enhanced something that was already there. People can say what they like without fear of being punched in the face for saying it. People can enter into an echo chamber where what they say, everyone else is saying. And as a result, it's really uncommon for people to have positive conversations with people they disagree with. Do try and avoid being one of those people. Try and avoid being one of those people who you can't have a conversation with without getting angry about it, without just kind of regurgitating talking points. Avoid labels. So often good conversations can just get derailed because we just label somebody. That's just woke ideology. That's just neo-Nazi thinking. It is very hard to have a civil conversation when one of those two things has been thrown around. If you do want to talk politics with people, discuss it to understand their perspective, to learn why they think the way they do. Don't do it to try and win, to try and land that latest zinger you've heard on a podcast. And most of all, if you're talking about politics, if you're more evangelistic about politics than the gospel, then you need to have a think about your priority. If your conversations, when you touch on politics, are about the gospel and gospel values, then fantastic. And I think that's very possible. Again, there's nothing wrong with not talking about politics, but it can be very powerful to give a compassionate perspective, to give a Christ-like perspective. But don't be one of those people who just is angry and argues all the time with people about politics. I don't think as Christians that's what we'd spend our time doing. Because underpinning all of this, we should remember all times our citizenship is in heaven. Whatever structures on earth are temporary. Our citizenship in heaven is eternal. Let's not lose sight of that. Let's not lose sight of pointing people to that. Saul said earlier, set our eyes on things above. There can be so many distractions, can't there, to the Christian faith, to the Christian walk. Politics can definitely be one of them. So let's get this balance right. Let's submit ourselves to the authorities. Let's set our eyes